Welcome to Mama Needs a Moment. We are here with just a few of our Her Plus expert providers. They have come to join us for this important roundtable conversation on maternal grief and loss, supporting moms through difficult and hard seasons. In the next several episodes, we're opening up space for the many forms of loss mothers experience, including but not limited to miscarriage, infertility, identity shifts, or the loss of relationships, health, or loved ones, the loss of loved ones. These are conversations that don't always get the space or acknowledgement that they deserve, often because they're uncomfortable, misunderstood, or don't fit into the more traditional or visible definitions of grief. And because of that, many mothers find themselves carrying these experiences quietly without the validation or support they truly need. Our goal is to bring these experiences into the open and to create a space where grief in all of its forms can be named, explored, and met with compassion. So before we begin, each of our experts will briefly introduce themselves and share their area of focus. And as a reminder, you can watch in video format over on our YouTube channel. You can access that link in our show notes. You can go to YouTube and search in the search bar for Her Health Collective. And you can also go to our website to get to YouTube. Kelly, would you pop on and say hi and give a little background?
Sure. Thank you for having me. My name is Kelly Smedley. I am a board certified psychiatric clinical nurse specialist, and I'm also a certified perinatal mental health professional. I am the founder and CEO of Waypoint Counseling and Maternal Wellness. We are a practice that focuses on pregnant, postpartum, and beyond. We serve women's and moms across North Carolina. And I am also a loss mom myself. I have experienced the loss of my son when he was 3 months old to SIDS, and that was almost 13 years ago. So I not only have professional experience, I have a personal story as well. And I'm excited to talk about this topic today.
Thank you so much, Kelly. We're sorry, so sorry for your loss. And thank you for using your experience as a way to help others.
I'm Catherine Rose. I am an integrative health practitioner. I work a lot with women and moms that are struggling with chronic or autoimmune conditions. And I'm also a single mom of two kids, 9 and 11. I'm just excited to be here. I too think this topic is not talked about enough. I'm glad that space is being created to talk about it and to make it more almost more common to talk about and to make it okay. Make it okay for us to feel and just let other moms out there know that they're not alone.
I'm Sarah Shimanovsky, and I'm the owner of Fermata Counseling, which is a practice where I focus on moms and perinatal mental health, but I have a soft spot in my heart for grief work as well. And like Catherine was saying, like, let's talk about it, because a lot of times in our grief, we are isolated, and the less isolation that there is, and the more these uncomfortable conversations are brought forward, the more we find our community and the more we find our safe spaces to talk about grief and realize that, oh, actually, we all walk our own grief journeys. And, you know, there's a lot that I can get from having these conversations with others.
We're moving on now to talk about grief inside relationships and how we have to hold it in motherhood. Grief is thought of as an individual experience, but in motherhood, it rarely exists in isolation. Grief never really does it? It shows up in partnerships and families and the relationships around us. One of the hardest parts is that people don't always grieve in the same way, which we've touched on in our previous episodes. One person may want to talk about things while another pulls inward and decides that they need time alone. And those differences can create distance or misunderstanding during a time when connection is needed most. Many moms also find themselves feeling unsupported by others who don't know what to say or say things that don't quite land the way they intended. And please go back if you need a little bit of input on that. So, in this particular episode, we're exploring how grief impacts relationships and what it can look like to stay connected through it all. My main question to all of you is, how does grief impact relationships and what can help couples and families navigate loss together?
I feel like one of the first things that comes to mind is for moms, there's like an added layer of the feeling like we have to hold everything together, like emotionally, physically, our family, like even while we're grieving, it can be hard to accept help. And that feeling can be and feel incredibly isolating.
Definitely. I think communication is crucial when a couple is experiencing a loss. And I see this a lot with miscarriage clients who've experienced miscarriage, where they are grieving deeply and their partner may not appear to be. And that can be really hard. And it's a different experience, right? Especially with miscarriage, because, the partner hasn't carried the baby. It's kind of surreal for them. So sometimes just educating folks about that can be helpful, but partnerships can really, really struggle after loss, especially if communication might not have been solid before. This is why divorce is high after the death of a child, because it can erode a relationship due to how everybody is processing the trauma and the grief and how they are communicating or not communicating. So I always encourage people, check in with your partner, give grace. It's really difficult when you might be having a good day and then your partner is not, and then that can ruin your day. And there's this ebb and flow, and especially in the early days. So really just being patient, but making it an intentional point to check in. Hey, how can I show up for you? What do you need? Realizing your partner has a different personality, different way of coping. They may be internalizing more. You may be more external, or vice versa. They may want to go in a quiet room. You may want to go and out with your friends and talk and talk. So it's really different for everybody. I think when there is that kind of misunderstanding or tension, it's important to just name it and be like, hey, when you said this, I felt this way and that upset me, and really hearing and getting curious about where the other person is coming from. And it even means years later. Like I mentioned earlier, a friend of mine recently suddenly lost her child, and I have not been myself this week. It's brought up my own trauma. And my husband, he checked in with me last night, like, how are you doing? And I was able to just verbalize to him that, it's brought up stuff I haven't thought about in years, and it's hard. And so being there, just realizing everybody's experiencing it differently, and just being honest with your partner can really go a long way.
I want to go back to the picture that Kelly painted earlier, and maybe it's in another episode, of like, instead of being linear, grief is like this really messy scribble. And so if you're listening and you don't have a visual, just imagine a 3-year-old taking a crayon on a piece of paper and just going to town. Okay, that is the line of grief. And a partnership is grieving something at the same time, grieving a loss at the same time. You've got two different scribble pictures, and they're not going to overlap in the same places. So all the suggestions that Kelly had of giving grace and understanding is so important, and breaking it down just a little bit more, trying to make sense of different types of scribble art, if you will. Cindy and Chrissy, we've talked about griever styles before, and so I just wanted to give those a name in this episode as well, of, you know, that grief researchers have given a name to what was once named feminine grief and masculine grief, which is bogus because whatever, we can leave that gender stuff away from the conversation there. And the names that have been given instead have been intuitive grief. So being an intuitive griever or an instrumental griever, or then maybe a combination of both, because again, we're not in black and white world here. We're in scribble world here. And so what an intuitive griever is someone who is emotive and is maybe openly weeping or even closed door weeping, but that is what they turn to express their grief. And we get that. We get that type of grief because that is the picture that we see. But in the other column, we have an instrumental griever who may be action oriented, who may be the one who is like suddenly organizing clothes or like maybe doing something not even useful, but like out building a birdhouse. I don't know what it would be. And you're like, what the heck are you doing? Why do you think this is important right now? Well, that could be their grieving style of like, instead of sitting in the tears, I am doing. I am finding something to do. And so to acknowledge that these two types broadly exist can help when you are going through grief with someone, whether that be going through grief with a sibling due to the loss of the same parent, or grief of a child, God forbid, right? Of two parents having the same experience, but then being so vastly different. And so understanding that both of these are okay, that you can be married to an instrumental griever and make space for them while you are sitting in your intuitive grieving style, right?
I actually have a question regarding that. So, in some of these situations, we've been talking about like mutual grief, where perhaps it is the loss of a child, God forbid, or we had talked about divorce a little bit, where both of them are grieving perhaps the divorce. What happens if it's something like illness, where there would perhaps be someone who's holding the illness? So, like, let's say there's a partnership and the female was diagnosed with some sort of health, and their partner had to deal with the care of them or them having the illness. So there's kind of two different things, where one is dealing with, I have to process that I have this health problem, and the other one is dealing with, oh my gosh, I have to deal with her being sick, or process through. Deal with is not really like the right language, but process through someone I care about having this illness. And this can be used in a lot of ways, like changing bodies and infertility, where the female is experiencing in her body the lack of being able to hold the child, where so can we talk a little about that? Does that make anything different, or is it all still the same processing?
It all makes everything different, and I think that's the key to this, like that there will be so much nuance in every single situation. And that one that you explained, like if someone were to come to me in a session and being like, I am going, for example, I'm going to take your first scenario. I am going through cancer treatment. I am experiencing this in my body. I am ill. I am sick. I'm feeling like, and my partner's over in the corner being an intuitive griever about my illness and crying, and I can't handle it anymore. I can't handle his feelings, right? It's important that we don't ever like take away someone's grief experience, right? And say like, you're wrong for doing that. You're wrong for having those feelings about my illness. And yet the coexistence of those two things must be so hard, right? So if I were, and I worked on something similar I with a client whose husband was really having big feelings about something that she was experiencing. And one thing that I asked her to do was like, can you have a script when he's in these feelings of, and you don't have the emotional capacity because you're over there dealing with the actual experience. Can you have a script? Can we come up with it right now of like something that acknowledges his experience and shows empathy, but then redirects to like your needs as the person going through it at the moment? So like holding space for the feelings of his grief and then redirecting him back to, I need some support right now as the person who is vomiting or as the person who is holding, whatever the circumstance is. So is that the right answer that I give in a podcast for like, this is what we do? No, but like in that, it would be a scenario by scenario, but in that particular scenario, I could see something like that maybe being helpful.
Thank you for that, Sarah. I think this conversation is really important because as we navigate grief within a relationship, it is so nuanced and there's so many layers because we do have different grieving styles and we do have different timelines. I loved Sarah's analogy of the two different scribbles laying on top of each other and how they'll never line up. So it's going to be a whole different process that we're going through at the same time. And in order to be there for one another and support one another and keep the relationship strong, there has to be some give and take and some conversations. Communication was something that has come up time and again in this conversation that I think is really important. So thank you everybody for your thoughts around this topic that I know sadly, many of us are going to go through at some point in our lives. I'd love to turn now to our final question, and it's an important one. What does support really look like? When someone we care about is grieving, most of us want to help, but often we don't know how. It's easy to fall back on familiar phrases, even if they don't always land in a helpful way. Because the truth is, support during grief isn't about fixing someone. It's not about fixing the pain. It's not about finding the perfect words. It's about being willing to sit with someone in the space that they're in and acknowledge what it is they are experiencing. And this is especially important for professionals supporting mothers, where the way care is offered can deeply shape how seen and supported someone feels. I have heard many examples from moms who have entered a space with a professional and perhaps felt that the support and care that they were offered did not resonate and was not what they needed. And it actually left them feeling more traumatized. So today we're talking about what meaningful, compassionate support actually looks like and how we can show up in ways that help moms feel less alone, and maybe even how moms can advocate for that for themselves if they need it, for example, in that professional relationship. So what does meaningful, compassionate support actually look like for mothers experiencing grief and loss? As we close this conversation, we want to acknowledge just how much courage it takes to carry and to name these experiences. Grief in motherhood doesn't always look the way we expect, and it doesn't follow a clear linear path, as we've said, but that doesn't make it any less real or worthy of care. If there's one thing we hope you take with you, it's this: whatever you are carrying, you don't have to minimize it, and you don't have to carry it alone. To our experts, thank you for bringing your insight, your compassion, and your honesty and vulnerability to this space. And to every mom listening, we see you, we honor your story, and we are so glad you're here. Until next time, this is Mama Needs a Moment.